bone at the base of your spine carries a name that shows what ancient civilizations understood about human anatomy. They called it the sacred bone. The Greeks called it hieron, the bone set apart from ordinary flesh. This naming occurred across cultures separated by oceans and millennia, civilizations arriving at the same conclusion. Something about this particular structure warranted recognition, reserved for temples and altars and objects of divine significance. The question worth examining tonight is why? Why would a triangular bone fused from 5 vertebrae at the foundation of the spine receive sacred status across human civilization? Why would the Kemetic priests who prepared bodies for the afterlife pay special attention to this region? Why would the Tamil Siddhars describe this location as the sleeping place of the primordial force? Why would Vajrayana practitioners work with this center as a gateway to wisdom that transcends individual memory? We have made videos on the energy channels in the body, on Shakti as the divine feminine force, on the subtle anatomy that Western science cannot measure and practitioners across 30,000 years have mapped with remarkable consistency. This goes into territory we have addressed less directly. The lineage dimension stored in bone, the portal that opens when attention meets this center with the right quality, the mechanism by which what your grandmother experienced, what your great-great-grandfather survived, what your bloodline accumulated across centuries, continues moving through your body today. By the end of this, you will understand why this bone received its name, what Shakti's residence at the root actually means for your daily experience, and how the phrase ancestors live here points to something more literal than metaphor. Toward the end, there is a practice for engaging this center directly, something you can work with tonight. To preserve clarity, I will favor English translations over specialized terminology throughout. When traditions use specific vocabulary, I will translate the meaning rather than pile up jargon. The precision remains. We always present quality on this channel, so just wait for it. Let's begin. The sacrum sits at the foundation of your spine as a triangular plate formed from 5 separate vertebrae that fuse during adolescence. In childhood, these 5 bones remain distinct. Somewhere between your 15th and 25th year, they merge into a single structure. This fusion creates a foundation strong enough to bear the weight of your entire upper body while transmitting force between your spine and your pelvis. Anatomically, the sacrum is the keystone of the architecture that allows you to stand upright. Without it, the spine would collapse into the pelvis. It holds the central channel of the spinal cord as it tapers into what anatomists call the horse's tail, the spray of nerves that descend from the spinal cord and exit through openings in this very bone to reach your lower body. But this structural significance alone cannot explain why the name sacred attached itself across civilizations. The femur bears tremendous weight, the skull protects the brain, the sternum shields the heart. Only this bone at the root received titles marking it as holy. The ancients understood something that modern anatomy has stripped away. They knew that this bone serves as more than structural support. It functions as an interface, a threshold, a doorway between dimensions of experience that ordinarily remain sealed from conscious access. In the Kemetic tradition, the spine was understood as the stability column connecting earth and sky, the visible and invisible realms. The foundation of this column, corresponding to the sacrum, was where the vital force that persists beyond death maintained its deepest anchor in the body. This vital force carried more than personal energy. It held the accumulated power transmitted through bloodlines. When the priests prepared the body for transition, they knew this region held patterns that would travel with consciousness beyond the flesh. The Tamil Siddhars, those 18 accomplished masters who achieved states beyond ordinary human limitation, described the root center at the bottom of the spine as the sleeping place of Shakti. But they went further than the simplified version often taught today. They understood that what sleeps at this origin point carries more than personal energy. It is the same force that animated every being in your lineage, the same power that moved through your mother's body as she carried you, the same current that flowed through generations you will never know by name and whose patterns you carry in the marrow of your bones. To understand why ancestors live in this location requires grasping something that Western biology acknowledges but rarely emphasizes. Bone is living tissue. Unlike hair or fingernails, which are composed of dead cells pushed outward from living roots, bone remains active throughout your life. Blood cells are manufactured in bone marrow. The immune system receives essential components from this production. Bone constantly remodels itself, laying down new material and dissolving old. It responds to stress by thickening in areas of demand. It carries minerals that the body can withdraw during times of need. Deeper than this metabolic activity lies something the ancients recognized: bone stores memory. Modern epigenetics has begun confirming what contemplative traditions taught for millennia. Trauma experienced by previous generations leaves marks on genetic expression that persist across descendants. The grandchildren of famine survivors show different metabolic patterns than populations without that experience in their lineage. The descendants of those who survived extreme stress carry altered stress hormone regulation, even when they themselves have faced no comparable threat. This is measurable biological reality. What your forebears experienced continued through their children and their children's children through mechanisms science is only beginning to map. The contemplative traditions went further in their understanding. They recognized that this inherited transmission concentrates at specific locations in the body: the sacrum, the foundation of the spine, the seat of the first energy center, the place where the dormant Shakti coils, holds the densest accumulation of generational pattern. Think about it structurally. The sacrum connects directly to the pelvis through the sacroiliac joints. The pelvis is the bowl that holds the reproductive organs. Through those organs, the physical link between generations passes. The sacrum sits at the junction between what you received from your lineage and what you will transmit forward, positioned exactly where inherited flow enters and exits the individual form. If you pause and examine what lives in the patterns you inherited before choosing them, reactions that arose before you knew yourself as a separate being, fears that made no sense given your personal history, abilities that came easily as if already practiced, wounds you carried without explanation, you begin to sense the dimension of yourself that extends backward beyond your birth. Something in you remembers what you never personally experienced. Something in you carries response patterns to situations your forebears faced generations ago. Something in you vibrates with accumulated survival wisdom, accumulated trauma, accumulated capacity that predates your individual existence. This something lives primarily in the region of your sacred bone. You tracking? If this teaching is landing in a way that shifts how you understand your own body, if you are recognizing that patterns you have carried might have origins beyond your personal biography, drop a comment about what you are seeing. I am going to walk you through exactly how to work with this region directly. There is a specific practice coming that you can use tonight. Just hang tight through the foundation. The Vajrayana tradition, particularly the lineage transmissions that trace back to Naropa and Tilopa, worked extensively with the root center as a gateway to what they called primordial wisdom. This term deserves examination because it shows the inherited dimension from a different angle. Primordial means from the beginning. Wisdom that is primordial exists prior to personal learning, prior to individual experience, prior to the accumulation of a single lifetime. The Kagyu masters taught practices that could access this wisdom directly by opening gates in the subtle body that normally remain sealed. The root center corresponding to the sacrum region was understood as the first of these gates, first in sequence rather than importance. The force dormant there must awaken before the higher centers can function at their full capacity. But this awakening carried a specific quality that differs from the simplified version often taught in popular spirituality. When Shakti awakens at the foundation, she awakens carrying everything that sleeps with her. The patterns of your lineage, the unfinished business of your forebears, the wisdom they accumulated through lives of practice, and the wounds they accumulated through lives of suffering, the capacities they developed, and the traumas they could resolve, all of this rises with the rising force. This is why genuine awakening of the root energy often produces what seems like regression before progress. Old emotions surface without apparent cause, memories that may belong to other lifetimes arise, fear patterns that the conscious mind never encoded begin moving through the body. The practitioner wonders why spiritual practice is making them feel worse rather than better. The answer lies in understanding what the sacrum actually holds. It is already full of what your lineage deposited there before you had any choice in the matter. Awakening the energy means awakening the entire content of that repository, both treasure and debris, both capacity and wound, both gift and burden. The Tantric practitioner learns to work with this intelligently, to allow what arises without drowning in it, to recognize inherited material as inherited rather than assuming it is purely personal, to transmute generational patterns rather than simply expressing them or suppressing them. Kashmir Shaivism offers a precise framework for understanding how consciousness contracts at the root center to create the experience of limited individuality. The teaching of the 5 contractions, the 5 coverings that limit infinite consciousness into finite experience, maps how the unbounded becomes bounded, how the all-knowing becomes the ignorant seeker, how that which lacks nothing comes to experience desperate lack. At the origin point, these contractions reach their maximum density. The infinite creative power, Shakti in her unlimited form, condenses into what feels like a limited individual cut off from source. This condensation occurs as the play by which consciousness explores its own possibilities through seemingly separate experience. Here is the teaching that remains largely unspoken in popular presentations. The contraction at the foundation carries more than personal pattern. It is cumulative across generations. Each forebearer who lived in contracted identification added their contractions to the field you inherited. Each trauma that went unresolved in your lineage increased the density at the root. Each pattern that got passed down without conscious processing added another layer to what you must work through if awakening is to be complete. This explains why 2 practitioners can apply the same techniques with dramatically different results. One may have inherited a relatively clear field at the foundation, forebearers who did their inner work, who processed trauma, who died with less accumulation. Another may have inherited tremendous density, generations of suppressed grief, unacknowledged abuse, survival terrors never metabolized, secrets never spoken, and somehow transmitted through the body anyway. The starting points differ, the work required differs. But the capacity for liberation remains identical because the awareness recognizing all of this was never actually bound. Only the content of the root center varies. The witness of that content remains untouched by what it holds. The phrase hidden portal in the title points to a capacity this center possesses that goes beyond storage. The sacrum region functions as an access point. When attention meets this center with the right quality, presence rather than manipulation, allowing rather than forcing, curiosity rather than urgency, a doorway can open. Through this doorway, communication becomes possible, communication with the dimension of yourself that extends beyond personal biography. The Kemetic priests practice techniques for accessing inherited wisdom through specific focus at the bottom of the spine. They understood that the luminous forebearers who had completed their journey successfully remained available as resources rather than simply as genetic legacy. The well-prepared practitioner could draw on accumulated wisdom that exceeded what any individual lifetime could gather. This differs from past life memory in the sensational sense often sold in popular spirituality. It is something more subtle and more practical. It is access to pattern recognition that was refined across many lifetimes, intuition that operates faster than personal learning could explain, knowing that arrives without being learned. Have you ever encountered a situation for the first time and known how to navigate it without any prior experience to draw on? Have you ever met someone and felt immediate recognition, as if something in you already knew them, though your personal history contained no basis for this knowing? Have you ever found yourself capable of something you never practiced, as if the skill was already installed before you arrived? These experiences point toward the inherited dimension in operation. Something in you remembers what you never personally learned. Something in you carries capacities deposited by those who came before. The portal at the foundation of the spine, when even slightly open, allows this accumulated wisdom to inform present experience. When fully open, through years of genuine practice, through grace that arrives unbidden, through the shock of intense life experience that sometimes cracks sealed gates, this portal permits something remarkable. Direct knowing that transcends the personal entirely, access to what the traditions call the wisdom of the lineage in its fullest expression. The relationship between Shakti and this inherited dimension deserves clarification. We have spoken in previous videos about Shakti as the dynamic creative power, the feminine aspect of consciousness, the force that moves while witnessing awareness remains still. Shakti mirrors consciousness in its active mode, the power by which the formless takes form, the energy by which the static becomes dynamic. At the root center, Shakti rests in potential state. The traditional imagery describes her as a serpent coiled 3.5 times around the lowest point of the central channel. Her head faces downward, toward the earth, toward density, toward the accumulated material of past experience. In this sleeping posture, she holds everything that has been deposited at the foundation: personal conditioning, inherited patterns, karmic accumulation across time. When she awakens, she turns upward. Her movement through the central channel is the process by which accumulated material gets processed, transformed, integrated. She carries it with her, she burns through it, she converts dense pattern into refined awareness. This is why her awakening is traditionally described as both blissful and terrifying. Blissful because the movement of creative power through the system produces extraordinary states of pleasure and expansion. Terrifying because everything she contacts as she rises must be fully experienced in order to be released. The inherited material you carry at the origin point will be felt, known, metabolized, or you will struggle to genuinely progress. Those who attempt to force her awakening through aggressive techniques before they have built the capacity to process what rises often find themselves in what contemporary language calls spiritual emergency. The traditional texts describe this in vivid terms: madness, physical collapse, dissolution of functioning personality. This is accurate description of what happens when generational material floods a system unprepared to integrate it. The wiser approach, taught across traditions, involves preparing the vessel before attempting to fill it. Purification practices that clear the channels, stabilization practices that strengthen the container, ethical conduct that stops adding new density while working to release old accumulation. Years of this groundwork before any deliberate activation of the root energy. The forebearers who live in your sacrum will be met eventually. The question is whether you meet them from a position of groundedness and capacity, or whether you flood yourself with material you cannot process, right? If what we are discussing is opening dimensions you had considered less directly, if you are recognizing something about your own body and its inherited load, let me know in the comments. We are about to get into the practical application of this. The foundation makes what comes next actually work. Stay with me. The Tamil Siddhar tradition offers a perspective on the sacred bone that connects anatomy, alchemy, and forebearer work into a unified understanding. These 18 accomplished masters, whose attainments spanned physical immortality, supernatural powers, and complete spiritual realization, understood the body as a laboratory for transformation. Every structure had functioned beyond the physical, every organ corresponded to forces that could be worked with directly, once the practitioner developed sufficient sensitivity. The sacrum, in their understanding, was the alchemical furnace where base material gets transformed into refined substance. The base material was precisely the inherited patterns, the generational deposits, the karmic load accumulated across bloodlines. The refined substance was conscious presence freed from the weight of that accumulation. They taught that the bones themselves carry memory in their marrow. This was observable reality to them, verified through practices that developed inner perception to extraordinary degrees. When a Siddhar placed attention at the sacrum with the quality of awareness their training had cultivated, they could perceive the accumulation directly. They could distinguish personal conditioning from inherited patterns. They could identify which patterns originated in this lifetime and which arrived from previous generations. With this discrimination came the capacity for targeted transformation. The alchemical fire at the origin point, Shakti in her ascending movement, could be directed specifically toward inherited material rather than burning indiscriminately. Patterns that had plagued a lineage for centuries could be transmuted in a single practitioner's dedicated work. What the forebearers could resolve became the sacred task of the living heir. This is why genuine practitioners were understood to benefit their entire lineage, backward and forward through time. When you transform an inherited pattern, you free yourself from its grip while altering what will be passed to your descendants. You offer healing to those who came before in some mysterious way, completing what they could complete, resolving what they could resolve. The living practitioner becomes a nexus of transformation for the entire lineage current. Consider the implications of this teaching for understanding your own experience. If patterns you carry originated before your birth, then the self-blame many carry for their struggles requires revision. You inherited the starting conditions, the anger that seems to arise from nowhere, the fear that makes no sense given your personal history, the unexplained talents and the unexplained wounds. These may carry origins that predate your existence. Responsibility remains, perhaps even clarifies. You are responsible because you are the one currently holding what the lineage deposited. You are the living heir of everything your forebearers placed in the repository at the foundation of your spine. What you do with that inheritance determines what gets passed forward. The victim narrative dissolves in this understanding. and so does the grandiose narrative of individual achievement. You are forebearer made, carrying their unfinished work, benefiting from their accomplished work, embedded in a transmission that extends beyond your individual span. Humility arrives naturally when this is truly seen. You are the current expression of something much larger than yourself. The question becomes, what can I transform of what I have received, and what can I transmit more clearly than I inherited? The hidden portal aspect of the sacrum opens most readily when three conditions align. First, attention must be able to rest at this center without forcing. This requires training. The untrained mind cannot sustain focus at the bottom of the spine, it wanders almost immediately. Practices that develop concentration capacity are prerequisite to genuine portal work. Without this foundation, what follows remains conceptual rather than experiential. Second, the quality of attention must be one of welcoming rather than manipulation. When attention arrives at the origin point with an agenda, seeking to force Shakti awake, seeking to grab experiences, seeking to prove spiritual advancement, the portal remains sealed. It opens to presence that wants nothing from what it witnesses. This quality of attention is what traditions call surrender or allowing. It develops through years of releasing the grasping tendency that characterizes ordinary attention. Third, there must be willingness to meet whatever arises. If the generational material begins to surface and you flinch, if the intensity of what was stored there exceeds your tolerance and you withdraw, the portal closes. It requires demonstrated capacity to remain present with difficult content. This is why purification and stabilization practices precede activation practices in authentic traditions. You must be able to hold what the portal releases. When these three conditions align, sustained attention, allowing quality and willingness to meet whatever arises, something can shift at the root of the spine. The region that normally feels dense or dormant or simply absent from awareness begins to communicate. Information arrives that the conscious mind did generate. Patterns become visible that were previously invisible. A relationship opens with the inherited dimension that allows conscious participation rather than unconscious inheritance. The portal, once even slightly open, permits work that cannot happen while it remains sealed. The Kemetic understanding of this region connects to their elaborate technology for navigating the after-death state. The priests who prepared the royal bodies for their journey understood that consciousness continues after physical death and must navigate a series of passages, each requiring specific knowledge and capacity. The accumulation at the foundation of the spine, what the living person had processed and what remained unprocessed, determined much of how this journey would unfold. A practitioner who had worked consciously with their generational material, who had transmuted the density at the origin point, who had opened the portal and communed with what it revealed, such a person died differently than one who had left everything unexamined. The journey after death would be clearer, less obstructed, navigated with wisdom that had been cultivated rather than stumbled through in confusion. This is why the mystery schools place such emphasis on preparation during life. Death was understood as an examination rather than an ending. What you had truly integrated would be available to you. What remained unprocessed would constitute the obstacles you faced. The sacred bone region, as the repository of generational accumulation, was therefore central to death preparation. Clearing this region meant clearing the pathway. Leaving it congested meant carrying that congestion into the transition. The pharaohs, who were also initiated priests, spent decades working with these teachings. Their role extended beyond the political into the spiritual. They were understood as nexus points for the entire civilization's inherited flow. What they transformed benefited their personal journey and the collective field they served. This is why such elaborate attention was given to their training and their death transition. The stakes extended beyond any individual life. Now I want to offer you a practice for beginning to engage this region directly. This is an introductory practice for developing relationship with the sacred bone region and beginning to sense what it holds. More forceful activation techniques require years of preparation and proper guidance. This opens a doorway gently. Find a seated position where your spine can be upright without strain. The sacrum will be in contact with the chair or cushion beneath you. Feel that contact now. Notice the triangular bone at the lowest point of your spine. Simple awareness of approximately where it sits. Feel the weight of your body resting on this foundation. Allow your breath to deepen naturally without forcing any particular pattern. As you exhale, let your attention settle toward the root of the spine. Settling the way sediment settles in still water. With your attention resting at the sacrum region, simply observe what is present. There may be density, there may be nothing discernible, there may be sensations that have no name. Simply witness whatever shows up without trying to change it. Now ask silently, what am I carrying here that I did generate myself? This opens a door rather than seeking a verbal answer. Simply hold the question while maintaining attention at the origin point of the spine. Notice any response. An image might arise. A feeling might intensify or shift. A sense of density or spaciousness might change. Witness without interpreting. Now ask, what did my forebears leave here for me to complete? Again, opening the inquiry and witnessing what arises rather than seeking verbal answer. Allow whatever surfaces to be present without needing to understand it or resolve it in this moment. You are beginning a relationship, simply acknowledging what lives in this region that extends beyond your personal biography. When the inquiry feels complete for now, let your attention expand back to your whole body. Feel the breath moving through the entire system. Notice any shifts in how you experience the sacrum region compared to before the practice. This can be repeated daily. Over time, sensitivity develops. What was imperceptible becomes increasingly discernible. Relationship with the inherited dimension begins to inform daily life rather than operating only unconsciously. It develops the capacity to sense what is held at the origin point without necessarily releasing it. Release happens in its own timing when preparation is sufficient and the system is ready. Forcing release before capacity exists creates the problems described earlier. The wiser approach trusts that relationship itself produces transformation over time. What is witnessed with presence begins to shift simply by being seen. Patterns that operated unconsciously cannot continue operating the same way once conscious attention illuminates them. The generational material in your sacrum may have persisted for bloodlines precisely because no one in your lineage ever turned attention toward it directly. Your witnessing changes the equation. This is why the traditions emphasize awareness itself as the primary transformative force, presence rather than manipulation or technique, the light of consciousness shining into regions that were previously dark. The illumination itself begins the work of transmutation. What cannot stand the light of awareness dissolves. What is genuinely part of your expression clarifies and strengthens. The connection between the sacrum and Shakti shows itself differently as practice matures. In early stages, they seem like separate elements, a bone structure and an energy that dwells there. With deepening practice, the distinction softens. The bone itself begins to feel like crystallized energy, materialized force, spirit condensed into form. Shakti at the foundation mirrors the intelligence that the bone embodies. This reflects the Tantric understanding that matter and energy share identity at their source. What shows up as dense physical structure is actually slowed down vibration, consciousness taking form so dense it seems solid. The sacrum shows up as bone because that is how this frequency of consciousness manifests to physical senses. To refined perception, it reveals itself as concentrated Shakti holding accumulated pattern. When this is seen directly rather than conceptually, the portal opens more fully. The rigid separation between physical and spiritual dissolves at the root of your own spine. What you call your body and what you call your soul reveal themselves as one reality showing up at different frequencies. The forebearers living in your sacrum are the sacrum itself. They are present as the very structure, as the marrow within it, as the patterns encoded in its cellular memory. Your body is your forebearer's body continued. Their flesh literally became your flesh through the biological mechanism of reproduction. The bone you call your sacrum contains minerals that were once in their bones, in the earth that fed the plants that fed them, in the stars that forged those elements before any life existed on this planet. You are carried by the same current that carried them. You are the lineage taking a particular form for a particular span before the form dissolves and the transmission continues. What lives in your sacred bone is the generational flow itself, carrying everything the lineage has collected, offering you the chance to clarify what you pass forward. The practical implications of this teaching extend into daily life in ways that might surprise you. When you react intensely to something that does warrant such intensity, consider the possibility that generational material is being triggered rather than personal history. The pattern may be much older than your biography. Your great-grandmother may have faced a situation that encoded a response pattern now activating in you. The intensity makes no sense as your response because it originated before you. Understanding the source changes how you work with the reaction. You are completing something unfinished in your lineage rather than fixing something broken in yourself. The orientation shifts from self-improvement to lineage service. When you encounter gifts in yourself that exceed what personal experience could explain, facility with healing, capacity for presence, artistic abilities that emerged without training, consider that forebearers may have cultivated what you now access. Their practice continues in you. What they developed persists in the lineage transmission and expresses through whoever in the bloodline is ready to channel it. Gratitude arises naturally when this is seen. You received your capacities as inheritance rather than generating them from nothing. The appropriate response is appreciation for those who prepared what you now enjoy. This gratitude itself opens the portal more fully. The forebearers who deposited these gifts sense, in whatever way they sense, that their work bears fruit. Recognition flows backward through time as surely as inheritance flows forward. One final dimension deserves attention before we complete tonight's exploration. The sacrum stores more than what was deposited in the past. It carries potential for what has yet to manifest. The same repository that holds generational pattern also holds generational vision. The dreams they held for their descendants, the capacities they hoped would flower in future generations, the unrealized possibilities they planted as seeds for those who would come after. When you access the portal at the root of your spine, you meet more than what weighs you down. You also meet what calls you forward. The forebearers left blessings, potentials, unrealized futures that remain available for those with the sensitivity to receive them. This is what makes the work feel purposeful rather than merely corrective. You are activating legacy while clearing debris. The gifts your lineage encoded in your sacred bone await your recognition. They have waited across generations for someone with sufficient awareness to claim them. In many cases, you may be the first in your lineage to have the luxury and the orientation to do this work consciously. Your forebearers may have struggled for survival in conditions that left no time for spiritual cultivation. They deposited what they could use, hoping that someday a descendant would arise with the capacity to work with what they could only store. You may be that descendant. The patterns waiting in your sacrum, both burden and blessing, may have been waiting specifically for you. If this teaching has connected with something you recognize in your own experience, if you sense the weight and the potential living at the root of your spine in a new way, let me know in the comments. If you have subscribed, this is the kind of work we do consistently, going deeper than surface spirituality into what ancient traditions actually taught and how it applies to direct experience. The sacred bone at the foundation of your spine holds more than structure. It holds the accumulated patterns of everyone who contributed to your existence. It holds the sleeping power that can transform all that accumulation. It holds a portal through which generational wisdom can inform present living. The name given to this bone across cultures reflected recognition of what this region actually contains and what it can reveal when approached with the right quality of attention. You are the current holder of what your lineage deposited here. You are the one who can work with it, transmute it, complete what was left unfinished, activate what was left dormant. This is the sacred responsibility that accompanies embodiment. You received from those who came before, you will transmit to those who come after. What happens between reception and transmission is your work, your practice, your contribution to the lineage current. What you do with the forebearers who live in your sacrum determines your own freedom and the freedom of those whose existence depends on what you pass forward. The portal at the root of your spine awaits your attention. What sleeps there awaits your recognition. What was stored there awaits your transmutation. The work begins with willingness to meet what lives in you that you did personally create. It deepens through practice that develops sensitivity. It matures into conscious participation in the transmission that your individual life expresses. The sacred bone, the seat of Shakti, the hidden portal of forebearers. You carry all of this in the structure at the foundation of your spine, and you are what witnesses that carrying without itself being carried anywhere. The awareness that recognizes the teaching tonight was never born and will not die. It was present when your forebearers lived. It will be present when your descendants navigate what you transmitted. It is the unchanging witness of the changing transmission. The forebearers live in your sacrum. You are what the forebearers were always pointing toward. The portal opens when this is recognized, that what looks is what every forebearer sought, and it was never separate from what they were. Same awareness, same sacred ground, different expressions, same essential nature. Your practice with the root of your spine is practice on behalf of everyone in your lineage, past and future, because the one practicing is the one they all secretly were. Rest in that and let the portal open in its own timing. What you find there will serve everyone you carry and everyone who will carry you forward. Let this land and begin.